Okay, hello guys. Your most cheerful, happy man on YouTube is back with another incredibly cheerful video for you. Another lecture to add to the collection. And I think this is a good one. This is a kind of extension adding to my previous video where I talked about the dice roll. For those of you who didn't watch that video or if you need to catch up with that video, it's a game of probability where you roll this dice with the devil. There's 100-sided dice, there's 1,000-sided dice, there's an ordinary 6-sided dice. And when you roll that dice, there's a likelihood that nothing will happen, like nothing bad will happen. But there's also the possibility that you roll badly. You roll an unlucky number, which I said was rolling the number 1. Maybe you have to roll it twice in a row or 3 times in a row. You have to roll a 1 3 times in a row as a game of probability. And if you are to roll in an unlucky way, someone you know, someone close to you will have something very unfortunate happen to them, something very painful, some kind of horrific thing. Okay, so I'll just put some examples up here on the board. Rape, okay, they could be raped. They could develop a chronic illness, an illness that's typically quite rare, or someone close to you, someone you know, might have a bad death. When it comes to the time that they die, the death is bad. They're very scared, they're awake, they're conscious, and they're not having a good time of it. Maybe it involves suffocation or some other form of death that is not pleasant. Or a war happens and they get drafted into war. Okay, these are some things. Or even something more mundane, but still bad things can happen if the dice roll's bad. But the catch is you don't have to play. You don't have to play the dice roll with the devil. You don't have to expose that person that's close to you, someone you love, to these horrors. And it turns out the person that you are exposing to these risks is your future child, okay? When you decide to procreate, you decide to expose your future child to these risks, okay? It's endangerment, in my opinion, and in my opinion, that is bad parenting. It's bad parenting to choose to set off a sequence of events which precipitate your child being exposed to these terrible risks, these grave dangers that our world has. You can choose to not bring another person, yet another person. There's 8 billion people on the planet, plenty of people you can help. You can choose to not bring another person into this world and expose them to those risks, okay? But some of you will say, well, I'm going to take my chances because I understand that you are rolling the dice. You could develop right from the get-go, the child that's been born could have a chronic illness. For example, their skin could just fall off. They could be born with a rare genetic defect that means that their body does not produce collagen in the layer under their skin. And that just means that if they're touched at all, their skin just falls off. Okay, and you're willing to risk your future child to that risk, however, because it's small, because it's a small risk and they probably won't, but you're willing to gamble your child's well-being on that. You cannot deprive someone who is unborn, so it's the safe option. It's the safer option when faced with these myriad of risks. Oh, I dropped it. There's myriad of risks, and I'm only just touching the surface of these risks, okay? But you might say, the likelihood is that nothing really bad is going to happen to my future child, okay? And this is where we left the last video, and that's where I'm going to pick up from. This is you. This is you rolling the dice, okay? This is your dice. Did you consider that the risks are amplified because if you choose to procreate, let's say, the average is 2 or 3 kids, right? 2.5 kids, I think, is the average, right? So 3 kids. So you could even You know, you could have, let's just be conservative and say 2. You have 2 kids, right? And then they have 2 kids. You see where I'm going with this? That's a lot of dice rolls, and we're only 2 generations out, okay? Let's add a 3rd generation. And we're being conservative here. We're saying that each of them has 2 kids, not 3 kids. As an average, a statistical average, right? So some of them will have no kids, some of them will have 1 kid, some of them will have 5 kids. But we're saying that statistically, they'll have about 2.7, I think it is. I can't remember. Every time they are playing the dice game, and this started with you. This tree, this family tree here, with these dice rolls, this was all because of you. You had the chance to choose not to do it in this timeline. By the way, this is like future, and this is past, and this is present. So some people have objected to my charts and things because they've told me that the past does not indicate the future. My counter to that is that the past is the only thing we have to determining what will happen in the future. Those who do not learn from the past, just basically going into life blindfolded. You're just stumbling around in the dark if you're not paying attention to past events. And we'll get into this. Some things that are happening now, unprecedented. There's no precedent that we know of. But many of them are familiar. Many of them reminiscent of things that have happened in the past. So we are going to be using the past to predict the future in the way that Isaac Asimov suggested with psychohistory. I think that's a pretty fascinating concept. Psychohistory is the study of history and then projecting out into the future to try and predict using things like statistics, right? Using large statistical averages to make reasonable guesses as to what will happen next. None of us know, right? Maybe this doesn't happen. But it would be very statistically unlikely for that to not happen. So each of these generations is exponentially rolling this dice more. Playing the dice game when it comes to chronic illness, rare genetic chronic illnesses, bad deaths, rapes. You know, I talk about rapes and some of you are like, yeah, right. I mean, rape, really? Isn't that a bit extreme? Isn't it a bit extreme to posit that maybe your child will be raped? 50%, roughly 50% of humans are females. 1 in 5 females reports that they have been sexually assaulted in their lifetimes. So yes, maybe it's not the full rape experience, I don't know, but 1 in 5 women, 1 in 5, that's not many rolls of the dice. First of all, you roll a dice and it's a 50% likelihood that they are female, right? For men, there is sexual assault with men, definitely, but it's a different statistic that I'm not researched on, but there is. But for females, let's just focus on females, 1 in 5 roughly. And you can tell me, hey, oh, well, it's actually 1 in 4.7833 recurring. I don't care. It's not important. The point is that there is a number. The point is not that I know the exact number. Statistics, they change all the time. The proportion could have just gone up just now as I was talking, right? So it's not important the exact number. It matters that there is a number. There is a possibility that your child, if you have one, gets raped, gets sexually assaulted, and you can't do anything about it. Anyone who says that they can is lying. I'm going to make this simpler, right? So I've talked about the tree and how it branches out into exponential possibilities, which means that these dice rolls, increasingly, as time goes on, these dice rolls, because of the decision you set in motion, these dice rolls get more and more likely to occur. It becomes higher likelihood that someone, as a result of your decision, develops a chronic illness that is intensely painful, like the lack of collagen example. But let's just keep this going. as singular. Let's just say that it's one and one. They just go on to keep the population because of you. You could have chosen not to do this, not to participate. You could have dedicated your life to adopting a child, taking care of people who are already here by whatever circumstance, whatever irresponsible decisions, right? Now, you could say, like a lot of parents that I've talked to, first of all, most of the reasons, the majority of the reasons that they use to justify the child choice is to say that they want a child. They want to be a mom or they want to be a dad. That's the number one. Like that's the main thing, is their own personal, selfish lifestyle choice. I've got to be real, guys. That's most people. If you then kind of force them, if you really ask them to just think, what about the interest of the child? Why do you think that it would be good for the child for you to birth them? Typically what they'll say is, I think I'd be a good mom, or I think I'd be a good dad. I think I'd do a good job of parenting. Okay. You are most likely, if everything goes well, you're not going to outlive your offspring, right? In fact, you're going to die long before they die. Right? My dad died when I was 30. I'm 30 years old now. My dad died this year, okay? So that's like less than halfway through my life. So you're going to die. You're going to be able to take care of them for the first half of their life, let's just say, if we're being generous. First half, and then you're going to die. So anyone that tells you that they can make sure that their child is protected from things like rape, from things like war, you know, they can move country, help their child to move country. Not really, because you're only going to be around for half of it. You're only going to be around for half of that life. You've set this thing in motion now, and you won't be there to be responsible for it. You won't be there to take care, to be a steward, even for this generation, even for just one generation on from you, let alone the next one and the next one and the next one, right? Now, if we go back, let's use the past. Let's look at your parents, and I mean no offense to them if you are someone who is sensitive about their ancestors. I'm sorry for what I'm about to say next. But I don't know you. I don't know your family. I have a strong inclination to guess that your grandparents weren't really thinking about you when they conceived your parents. Your parents might have been thinking about you when they conceived you, but they were probably doing it as a lifestyle choice. They probably wanted to be parents, or they like to screw. You know, a lot of the older generation, they do it because they like to screw, and they've got, it's a good way to pass the time, right? They like to screw. Your great-grandparents definitely weren't thinking about you. Most of human history has actually been doing this because it is a biological, like we're biologically hardwired to want to fornicate. It's very hardwired in there. And in fact, this generation might be the first generation in human history, aside from a few free thinkers like Schopenhauer, like really smart cookies, it might be the first generation in history to truly think with rational, critical thought about the child choice. Every other generation before us has done so through animalistic motivations, like purely, they did it when they weren't thinking, you know? Pregnancy is an unconscious activity, right? I mean, and it's happened. People have been in comas, they've been pregnant in comas, and they've continued the pregnancy without being awake, right? So it's an unconscious activity. And so it's not something that takes a lot of thought. It perhaps doesn't take any thought, it could be argued. But this is the first time where procreation has been potentially like an active decision, a decision based on rationality. There's actually a great Schopenhauer quote that David Benatar brings up, and it says something like, if the human race were to have children purely through rational decision making, would the human race continue to exist? He's got a point, you know, it does make you wonder. It does make you wonder. I think this pen is running out, I think, pretty soon, so let me switch over. Okay. Each generation is a dice roll, and so on, into the future. This is you. Past, present, future. Now the situation, there's a lot of mental field distortion around our situation here. But first of all, I just really want to hit home that you're not in control past here, right? You're not in control of anything that happens to these later generations, but the only control you have is right here in the present. You have the opportunity to simply not create that chain of risks, that risk chain that gets exponentially larger as time goes on. Hopefully just this concept hits home how big of a decision it is to perpetuate the population pyramid by pumping out kids. Let's talk about the situation. We've got a few things here. We've got like the economy, danger, intention. I'm going to be using the economy quite a lot to talk about this because I think the economy is where I really started to see human behavior and long-term cycles. There's a guy called Ray Dalio, who's kind of a big shot in investments and hedge fund management and stuff. He's a billionaire. He's in the Big B club, and he talks about cycles. And he's totally willing to be a contrarian. He doesn't always call it right, and he acknowledges that. He acknowledges that he won't always call it right. But he says that through human behavior, when the economy is doing this, and it's going up and up and up and up, there's a tendency to believe that the economy is just going to keep going, that it's just going to keep going up and up forever. And you see this not just with finance and economy, with the stock market, but you also see it with things like science fiction. We're having concepts of like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5 civilizations, right? And the final stages are like, here's the sun, and then we just kind of block out the sun with these solar panels that are like in orbit around the sun, and it's like limitless energy, right? You're totally harnessing the power of the sun, of a star, in order to create like interstellar travel, and you know, maybe using wormholes to expedite your travels to other destinations, becoming interstellar species, right? This is all like Musk's sci-fi vision of the future, that it's just like the tech bros wet dream, and it's super popular right now, right? You know, back in Victorian times, when the economy was good, in Victorian times they would talk about colonizing the deep sea ocean, and they imagined themselves all riding around on backs of seahorses, on the backs of squids, and like having these bubble towns underwater. Another time there was the idea that they would drill all the way through the earth to the other side. You know, you get these sci-fi visions of the future where you just imagine, you project that the good times are just going to keep going. We keep going up. And Dalio, at least in the world of economics and in the stock market, he says that's not really what happens over a long term. It's like a sine wave. And it might go up a little bit, and then it might go down a little bit. If I zoom out a little bit, it's like this. And you actually, if you look at a stock market chart over a long enough time period, this is what it's doing. And some of these little ones, like these, also trick people, right? These little upticks, they're like, this is the one, it's going up, it's going to keep going up. This idea, this wishful thinking that it's going to keep going up. And you can also have this delusion when it comes to like wider society, you know, geopolitics. You can believe that there's going to be a point in time where humans are going to stop having wars. They're going to stop ruthlessly fucking each other over for resources. So yeah, the situation right now might be fairly good. But you'd be a fool to think that it's going to keep getting better without your future generations having the threat of war or a nuclear winter, or like such a perfect, pristine healthcare system that they would never have to worry about something like a genetic illness, a chronic illness, or any kind of health problems in their later years, any kind of pain or discomfort. You would be a naive Pollyanna to think that none of your future generations will be dealing with the shit that you're dealing with right now. In terms of danger, that is just as crazy to think that there are no dangers today. This is your parents' generation, right? It's sometime around here that the Cold War really kicked off. You know, your parents might have been in school at the time. Yeah, probably your parents were in school, if I'm thinking about my demographic right, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened and nuclear war was narrowly avoided. Okay, it was mostly fought with espionage and ideology, things like the Red Scare. Hold on, this is crooked, isn't it? Let me just bring it back this way. There we go. Things have never been the same again. Never has it been so easy for a world leader to detonate a nuke on a major city in the same fashion of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let's talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These cities were comprised mostly of civilians, of families, and some of those people in Hiroshima were excellent parents. I can just make that as a guess, as an educated guess. There were some excellent parents in Hiroshima who believed the delusion. They believed that they could protect their offspring from bad things happening to them. And then one day that delusion came crumbling down when the bomb hit, and the people in the middle were vaporized, and that's okay, I guess. It was just like turning off a light, I suppose. But the people on the outside of the epicenter, they experienced uncontrollable vomiting. They had radiation sickness, some of them, their skin melted off. Nasty stuff, really nasty stuff. Really impacted the psychology of the Japanese people even today. It's rippled through the generations, and you could argue they've never been the same again. You know, if you look in their media, they're still dealing with this collective trauma. Some of the most famous IPs that have ever come out of Japan are things like Godzilla. Godzilla being an allegory for the bomb. Anyway, interesting topic. So there have been actually some new dangers that have come into the world since your grandparents' generation. And right now we could be on the cusp of another one, right? So this is our generation. I'll put another one here, which is AI. We don't know. I'm pretty skeptical of a lot of the excitement around AI, but really we don't know. Anyone who tells you they do know is they're probably not qualified, and they're probably experiencing the Dunning-Kruger effect, okay? AI poses a unique threat, you could say. There's a lot of information out there on people, and it actually makes us very vulnerable. It makes this next generation very vulnerable to cyber attacks. It makes this generation very vulnerable to what you might call a technocracy or a techno-autocracy, which is run by a superintelligence that is able to manipulate data and therefore people in ways which serve the robots, that serve the AI, you could call it, that serve some kind of artificial mind that is far beyond ours. And humans might, we don't know, but humans might become a means to the robot's ends. That could mean some kind of enslavement, some kind of coercion by robots. In fact, we're already kind of seeing soft coercions by artificial intelligence, but it could become worse. It could become really nasty, where humans are enslaved. They are forced into labor with no concern for their own well-being, because it's not created for their well-being as the center of these considerations. And we don't know, and that could happen. That really, really could happen. That could get worse. That could get a lot worse. That could get a lot worse there, okay? So I worry about that, and if you don't worry about it, you're a fool. You should be worrying about this stuff because you have the choice to not expose others to these dangers. The danger of enslavement, right? That's on you. So that's just another one. We don't know what's coming next, guys. We really don't. It would be irresponsible to gamble someone else's life or a group of other people's lives to this. Obviously, you'd think that if something really bad happened in your child's generation, then maybe they would not have kids. So maybe this lineage would stop before that. You'd think that that might happen, but then again, with enslavement, maybe they lose control of their reproductive choices. That's another possibility, you know? It could become the Handmaid's Tale enforced by robots. We actually don't know. And this probably all sounds like crazy talk. Future predictions always sound like crazy talk until they happen. And then the person who said them is hailed as a genius. But until then, they just sound like an idiot, like a crazy town crier. I don't think anything I've said here is completely unreasonable as potentialities for things that could happen. So dangers, there are actually more dangers that have been introduced into the world since your grandparents, since your great-grandparents, when they were procreating, often for fun and often without any contraception around. At least the consequences of that at the time for the next generation were contained somewhat. Like the worst thing at this time was that you would like fight in a war, or that you would, I don't know, live a very boring, dull life which you couldn't escape, right? It's either way too much excitement or not enough excitement, right? That was the real danger, it seemed, if your grandparents or your great-grandparents. War was the major one. By the way, we're kind of due for a war. I really do think we're due for a war. I don't like that we're due for a war. But, you know, something about this, you know, since the end of the Second World War, and we've had, you know, certain countries like America has had the Vietnam War and stuff like that. That's making it slightly less easy for me to quantify in a graph. But since the end of the Second World War, as a world war, we've had an era of relative peace. So things have been good here. It's been peaceful. The Cold War had the threat of violence, but it didn't end up being nuclear hot war. It was a lot of saber rattling a lot of the time, right? Again, when there is a period, like in the economy, when there's a period of growth, there's the delusion that the good times will keep on going. And the same can happen for geopolitics and war, right? The fact that we've had relative peace leads people to the delusion that this peace can keep on going. The problem is that peace is the very thing, you could see peace as being the very thing that creates complacency. Almost all wars have this as a precipitating factor, because for a real war to happen, the people have to be willing, usually on the side of the aggressor mostly, but the aggressing side has to have a sufficient amount of complacency around war. They have to trivialize war, they have to glorify war in a way, and peace is what allows them to create that complacency, which is the preconditions for a war, you see? So it's unfortunate, right? It's tragic. But just like the economy, a runaway economy, a boom, is what creates a bust. If you look at the 2008 housing crisis, again, it's complacency. The 2008 housing market crash was caused by complacency. All of these firms that weren't checking subprime mortgage lending for houses is exactly what led to it being a bubble, and that bubble has to pop at some point if it just keeps on going. So, unfortunately, and I hate to break it to you guys, you know, this feels like it's someone telling kids that Santa Claus isn't real. It doesn't please me to do this. I don't feel smug in telling you this, but we are you know, we're due for a war. Maybe we can hold it off for long if things like NATO and treaties like that work and continue to hold fast. But yeah, the complacency, and we're seeing it with people like Donald Trump, okay? If you think for a second that we've got our shit figured out as a human civilization, the most powerful man in the world, the so-called leader of the free world, Donald Trump, recently I think he renamed the Department of Defense in the US to the Department of War, right? A name change where he didn't like the word defense, right? Because it suggests that he cannot initiate an offensive maneuver, right? And again, it's never really stopped the US from bombing countries or from having assassinations in countries without permission and breaking international law. It's never stopped the US, but just symbolically for the so-called leader of the free world to rename the department to the Department of War, okay? This is the kind of behavior that starts getting more and more extreme, and it comes from complacency. War on your home soil, it's a different standard of life, I would say. You might have to ration. You're under constant fear. You're under constant stress. Ask the people in Kiev right now, or the people in Mariupol, day to day, they will tell you that there are pockets of joy and things, but they'll tell you at night that they hear this booming, this loud booming in the distance, and they can even see it on the horizon. They can see buildings on fire, hospitals, schools. Putin is not above any kind of war crime. And ask one of them, you know, ask a Ukrainian who lives, even in Kiev, the capital city, what's your average level of stress at night? You know, you're just living under the presence of potential annihilation at any moment from drones. Okay, that's modern warfare for you. The standard of living, when war happens, like with Ukraine, it goes down, right? It's not a nice life. And in fact, I would say it's really irresponsible to bring more people into a world where they could get drafted, they could suffer long-term PTSD from having to commit murder on behalf of their state, right? They might be sent to the front lines, they might have to control a drone and drop a bomb on someone's head and see their brains fall out, right? This is stuff that, why would you bring a person into a world like that? And we're kind of establishing that we're not out of the woods yet. We have not got our shit figured out. Donald Trump was elected for a second term. And you might say, well, that's America. I live in the UK. I live in Spain. I live in Germany, right? But it's the leader country. Every country looks to them. And also what America decides to do affects the whole world. It's not a good look. And even if you go to Xi Jinping, he's looking to take back Taiwan. They're building the boats. They're building the rafts right now, the pontoons that are going to allow a sea invasion of Taiwan. As we speak, they are building them and they are testing them. That's Xi Jinping, right? These are corrupt people with their own plans, and they are people that don't give a shit about you. They will use you as cannon fodder. Let me talk about a little bit more about war before I go on. Like, what do we do when an economy creates a surplus, like a huge surplus, right? What do we do with an economy that is incredibly prosperous? We use it, unfortunately, and I don't like this fact, but we use it to fund the war machine. That's what they do with excess wealth. They turn it into bombs and they drop them on the ground and they destroy buildings. They destroy wealth. That's the thing. It's like throwing money into a big pit and then setting the pit on fire. That's what people do. And you might think that is, you might think that's, oh yeah, but that's them. That's not me. That's them. That's governments. That's like corrupt governments. That's not sensible countries, right? Sensible countries don't do that. I'm telling you now, it's the human condition. And let me prove it to you. When's the last time you watched a fireworks display? Where I'm from, they do a fireworks display every year. They go to the shops every year, at least once a year, maybe twice a year or 3 times a year. They go to the shops, they spend, the town spends a bunch of money, maybe from council tax. They spend a bunch of money on explosives, and they all get together and they light the fireworks on fire and they watch it all burn. They watch it all burn. That's the human condition. I hate fireworks, by the way. I think it's pointless. But that's what, even just ordinary civilian populations, they love lighting money on fire when they have too much of it, or when they have, a sufficient amount of it. This is the human condition. This is what it builds up to. All the war machines of the past, they were built from economic prosperity, right? From industrialization. And the war machine is like something to do with that money. It's something that allows an economy to keep going. And I'll keep going with this because I think this is an important point about the prospects of future war and how war will happen in the future. At a certain point, it seems that the war machine kind of becomes necessary, because otherwise, if you don't have that and you have an egalitarian system where everyone has their needs met, then there's no one to clean the toilets, right? So there needs to be wealth disparity in a way in capitalism. So this is like a inherent flaw with capitalism. But like excess wealth actually starts creating problems in the capitalist system, right? And also the interests of arms dealers and people like that, they have an incentive to go to war, and that incentive increases. I want to look to a few historical examples. We could be at an apex right now. I think it's more likely that we're at an apex than we are at a trough, or that we are rising up. I think it's more likely that we're here and things are going to get a little bit shit. It just seems that way, okay? It appears to be heading that way, like we're on our way down now. We're going down. Syria. In the ancient world, Syria was a hub of technology. Some of the greatest minds, the greatest engineers, the greatest mathematicians would meet in Syria and in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. These were great hubs of innovation and commerce. And look at Syria now. The same thing can be said a little bit with Greece and with Rome. It's quite typical. The American empire has not been around for very long. It's really to be determined where they are in this cycle, but it really seems like America could fall, could have a downfall. And that upset can have ripple effects that affect everyone's lives, especially in the West, but also in the East. We have these rising Eastern powers, and they're just waiting for a chance to challenge the hegemony, the American hegemony, okay? These are tumultuous times that we might be heading into. All the signs are there that this is unstable. We are in an unstable situation, and things could get really bad. And this all results in your kids, their lives being a bit shit. So I don't want to hear from people that like the good always outweighs the bad. Like, from your position of privilege, having grown up without a war on your doorstep, you're not qualified to say that. And also, you can't control what happens next. Like, all of this is outside of your control. As a regular person, this is going to happen to you and to your family. And the only real major choice you have in the matter, the only real say you have, is whether or not you expose more people than necessary to these problems, to this difficult times we're going to be living through, right? If you were in 1925 and you had a crystal ball, which you knew was correct, and you could see that the Dust Bowl was coming, would it be responsible for you to have 3 kids? Would it be responsible for you to bring 3 kids into a world where there's going to be no jobs that they can have. There's going to be nowhere for them to fit in, and they're going to be scraping a living. They're going to be an inch away from starvation at all times. Is it responsible? I don't think it's responsible. We don't know what's going to happen, and you won't be there to control the outcome of anything when your offspring is 40 years old or 50 years old. You can't have this thing of like, I'm going to protect them. I'm going to be their protector. I'm going to make sure they have a great life. They could have 40 years of blissful life, and then 20 years could be just like solitary confinement in a totalitarian regime when you're not around, right? Imagine that, 20 years of solitary confinement in a jail cell without any contact. It's unimaginable, but that's a possibility. If there was an authoritarian regime, or if the government collapses like Somalia and they get held at ransom. This has happened in real cases, right? We don't know. We don't know, and we don't need to know the likelihood. We only need to know that there is a likelihood. So a lot of the delusion is what I call the illusion of control. What was it? The Russian Tsars, the Russian family that had the Fabergé eggs made for them, this incredible luxury and opulence they lived in. And then at a certain point, the government collapsed. They probably thought they were going to have it good forever, that their kids were going to live in a great life. They were chased into exile. They were chased into hiding. They were hunted down, right? The Russian, I don't know if it's the royal family. There's a good film called The Last Emperor. This little boy was raised with the utmost care. He had like a team of eunuchs to bathe him and clothe him and take care of him and teach him, right? It's just the best conditions for a childhood that they could possibly imagine, like all the money and resources in the world, right? And then the regime collapsed, and they didn't expect that. The regime collapsed. He was forced into exile, forced into hiding. He was brought before a court with Japan. He had a really rough life after that childhood. Unpredictable. Dangerous. It's a dangerous world, even for the most privileged. Yeah, think about this. Think about this. We really need a paradigm shift that changes procreation from an unconscious activity to one where we need to critically assess whether we're doing something responsible. Someone who wants to bring another life into the 8 billion people that are already here should be thinking, why is that a good idea for the child? Like, is that exposing the child to dangers? Because so far, all of this has been just kind of default. It's default. It's culturally the norm. It's a very mindless activity. Those are my thoughts for that. So thanks for watching.